here. And welcome to Feminist Educational Practices in Post-Pandemic Classrooms. I'm thrilled that you are joining us. Thank you to Laura for that great introduction, Alexandra, and the PDGIA organizers and volunteers for inviting me to speak and for hosting these virtual conferences. I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge that I am situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe people. The Anishinaabe include the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. My name is Amy, and I teach at formerly known as Ryerson University and Yorkville University and Georgian College. I've been teaching online for over a decade and have had 17 years in the classroom. All right, so our outline for today, we are going to be discussing how education is changing in this liminal pandemic life. We will look at strategies to help students and faculty situate themselves and steady themselves while within the uncertainty, and to take with us on the other side of this pandemic. And we'll be utilizing theoretical perspectives such as intersectional feminist theory and engaged educational pedagogy to support our discussion. So if you can just take a moment here and read through this quote by the great Arundhati Roy. This is from the Financial Times, and she posted this article on April 3rd, 2020. And in it, she is discussing this idea that we are in a portal, that the pandemic is a portal, this gateway between one world and the next. And I began thinking, how did this idea of a portal translate to education and feminism? What opportunities are within the portal? So pandemic life has isolated us between before and after, this narrowing of life. We are haunted by the past, both what we miss and what was damaging. And we need to abandon the damaging oppressions of the past because the pandemic has greatly impacted the way we interact and integrate with the world around us, to address and adapt to the chaos and messiness of abrupt shifting into self-isolation or quarantine or lockdown, and the way we need to be flexible in the approaches to work and to socialize and to educate. So educators in this time can use this as an opportunity to rethink neoliberal educational strategies, to act against pre-existing inequalities within academia, and to recognize that students and faculty are all grappling with a heavy emotional toll. And this educational fallout illustrates a pressing need for feminist approaches to teaching and learning, because feminist educational practices can steady educators in this transitory time, because they historically value and utilize unease, flexibility, and reflection. So today I will be exploring specific approaches on how to integrate intersectional feminist educational practices during and post-pandemic within the classroom. So to begin, we need to recognize that academia's contribution to the pre-pandemic educational state has its positives and its flaws. So to go through the portal is to know how it was constructed. The institutional framework of post-secondary education has become destabilized alongside this unsteady narrowing of pandemic life. And feminism advocates for a critical education that understands that schools and education in general is constructed and organized within a field of power. Thus, continual and meaningful critique and change is necessary in order to address and release what no longer academically serves students and faculty. I too advocate for awareness within the portal by utilizing feminist educational strategies. So in other words, the place to start is deconstruction from within. All students and faculty, regardless of and because of their gender, race, age, ability, sexual orientation, and social class, will benefit from intersectional feminist educational strategies, because when we think about interdisciplinary approaches to theory, it's helpful even if you do or do not identify as a feminist. Sandra Stanford Friedman describes interdisciplinary work within feminism, and in her case, literary studies, as traveling between two homes. With a deliberate interaction between different disciplines, Stanford Friedman's work exists within a broader, interconnected field of study. So in my case, my disciplinary home is visual arts and art and design, history and theory, whereas which is informed by my political home of feminism. And I encourage participants to consider their disciplinary and political homes and how they intersect in the classroom. Participants on the margins of feminist practice can benefit from interdisciplinary travel between feminist ideologies and their core academic focus. Within my teaching practice, this collaborative border crossing has also allowed me to address sexism within the business and historical retelling of art and design, while simultaneously provoking awareness and activism of how my students' practice will be impacted by creative androcentrism. So to recognize the ever-changing pandemic context is to accept that portal life will inevitably be cluttered. Because life outside of academia is already destabilized, we can utilize these new shape-shifting skills within the post-secondary classroom. Oscillating between the past and present and uncertain academic future demands a theoretical stabilizing that feminist pedagogy can provide, specifically because it resists binary polarities. Feminist educational practices welcome that which is in flux rather than static. And it offers critical insight that embraces relational theory concepts such as both and in times of transition rather than either or dualistic thinking. Indeed, the simultaneous layering of context and experience, reflection and action all dissolve the boundaries or the binaries of the portal itself and recognizes one of the costs of non-linear life. Life, as we know it, may be in shambles. And this is a helpful reminder that teaching and learning in a global pandemic is bound to feel messy too. Since so much is changing within our personal lives and our local communities, students are turning to their student peers and professors to share their stories of experience. Despite the many flaws of COVID academia, this reimagined classroom still serves as a craved form of community. One of the ways we can encourage awareness within this messy portal life is through a call to action. So I'm already teaching in my 7th term in the pandemic. At the beginning of each term during the pandemic, I post this call to action. And this is a message to students which encourages them to actively remember that this moment in time is important, to embrace what creatively flows and to direct their concepts and practices towards social justice and inner healing work. Current students will inherit a post-pandemic world, and their practice must respond to the context. So here's a little excerpt from my call to art or call to action message from March 2020. And instead, by being buried in pre-COVID curriculum, this paradigm must shift in the way we acknowledge the dynamic overlap between experience and learning. Because the pandemic is already changing our lives, another way to encourage the impact of this global event to be processed by our students as evident and punctuated in their assignments. And in response to this call to action, students begin situating their class discussions, assignments, and critiques to engage with the current context while describing their anxieties in cathartic and creative work. Outside of academia, in the pandemic, self-reflective activities are already ubiquitous due to a shifting of time and activity, the lifeline of social media, and the desire to share and connect. Engaging in self-reflective practices is another feminist education strategy that mimics pandemic practice activity and supports community building for all class members. Encouraging self-reflection is a critical tool for transformation and social justice for students that can deepen their connection to curriculum, enhance the class community. Because we chronicle our lives, not just to have these memories and perspectives heard and recorded, but because it reminds us that we are not alone and that these stories are worth being listened to. And to support educational self-reflection, feminist pedagogy encourages layering the record of past events through multiple standpoints within a current context. And this can be done through introductory conversations and forums that move beyond traditional introductions and instead describe the context and emotive state and lived experiences. And expanding the boundaries of usual class discussion during the pandemic is necessary, and it can take the form of presentation or creative work and video, verbal discussion, and writing. And there are major ways that faculty can embrace reflection. So it would be fair to say that simultaneous professional reflection, that is the educator's ability to work while reflecting on practice and adjusting as necessary, might be a lofty expectation in the midst of a global health pandemic. But nonetheless, this task remains critical to maintain awareness of how uncertainty and fear can impact learning and how faculty can respond to it at the time and going forward in future terms. Inclusive and reflexive dialogue can be encouraged through the professor's example. So you can set the tone of these conversations through the teacher's own reflective writing. So for example, I post in my on campus as well as my virtual classes messages to students that express my personal framework and encouraging students to communicate their own narratives so that together we can deconstruct how these changes impact our personal learning experiences, how our curriculum needs to adapt and evolve, and the many impacts on our local and global communities. And this self-reflection and the shared experience from the professor creates trust. It's a record of process while managing all that is changing within learning. It emphasizes vulnerability, indeed the mess, and the state of transition. And this can move beyond the often distanced and heavy engagement with critical theory. And to summarize, the teacher can set clear parameters for expectations within their examples, remind students to respond with empathy and compassion, and utilize critical thinking skills to dig deeper into the ideas and structures and experience presented. And then the discussion boards, right? Many on-campus classrooms have moved to virtual delivery. Discussion board forums offer a potential for a safe dialogical space for students to learn and connect. And this can inform their assignments and discussions and outside classes and experiences, which is especially evident if marks in discussion board forums and within discussion conversations are mildly weighted to encourage reflection for reflection's sake. Lastly, inserting reflection into action beyond the classroom. Feminist educational pedagogy, already deeply entrenched in the idea that education is not just about, but for social change, can be engaged through narrative and creative reflection to positively impact the class dynamic and, importantly, beyond it. So by incorporating theory and research of feminist analysis and action within the classroom, learning opportunities during and post-pandemic can manifest. It is here in the trauma of this time that education serves beyond the insular classroom and will support and motivate students and faculty and our integrated communities beyond academia. Revolutionary educational paradigm shifts can respond to these extraordinary times. Thank you very much.